Well, good morning, good evening, wherever you are this time of your listening. My name is Sukhsimranjit Singh, Dr. Singh in short, and I am so pleased and honored today to have Mr. Chuck Crumpton with me from all the way from Hawaii. Mr. Crumpton, I like to call him Chuck if that's okay with everyone. Chuck, you can call me Sukhsimranjit, all is fine. We go way back many years, but allow me to do a brief introduction. I'm a very big fan of this man because he's a true conflict resolver. He's a believer. He is the person who his presence kind of calms people down. He's a very hard worker. He's been in the business of law for more than 45 years. He's been in the business of dispute resolution, or rather, let's call it the service of dispute resolution for more than 35 years, maybe 40th year as a neutral work, including about a decade of exclusive work in mediation and arbitration. Um, did I get that right, Chuck, so far?
Absolutely spot on.
All right. And I am very pleased to share with you that Chuck has been to more than 20 countries around the world, and he speaks fluently English and Vietnamese. And he is a gifted leader in the field of dispute resolution. Many of us on the West Coast, on the East Coast here in the United States, look up to Chuck to call him to get help when we need it. And so I'm very pleased to have Chuck Crumpton with us. How are you doing, Chuck?
I'm doing great. One slight modification, I think rather than word leader, companion.
All right.
It's the journey, right?
I will leave that to you to define, and companion is perfectly fine. I would say that um, Chuck has been serving on many leadership uh, committees in American Bar Association over the years. Am I right there in leadership capacities
Eh, Yeah, in the team sense,
in the team
right?
sense?
Because that's what we do, right? Relationship building, team building, and consensus building.
Wonderful. Well, today we have a special recording, special interview about role and value of questioning in dispute resolution. And I'm very happy that Mr. Compton is with us to discuss the power, the value, the role, the beauty, the charisma, the need, the sense of asking good questions. So let me pause here and before we jump into I requested him to think about his top five or some questions. Before we jump into that, and he requested me to prepare my own questions, and we haven't exchanged notes. We may have identical questions or similar questions, but let me pause here and ask you any thoughts on just the role that questions play in our field, Chuck?
I think that in itself is a great question that shows the role and value. If you start your relationship with a person by a question, you are approaching them with sincere interest in who they are, what they have to share, where they are, what it may take for them to go forward in ways that can work for them. You're opening that door to share themselves with you. And you're opening it in a way that both models and invites trust. You say, this door is open, there is light here. You're welcome, come in. To me, that's what questions do. They connect people in opening, trusting ways. Statements do not. Statements can be competitive, they can be divisive, they can distinguish people rather than connect them.
Love that. Love that. Opens doors. Questions open doors. Um, let's get into it. Give me your top list, or let's start with one or two questions. What are your most favorite questions that you like to ask in your conflict resolution work? And I know you do a lot of mediation. I know you do arbitration. And if you want to define even more broadly your work in conflict resolution, please feel free to.
Well, let's focus for now on mediation because it's the only forward-looking, forward-moving process in our legal system that lets people try and craft something that enables them to go forward with their lives. So understanding that and understanding and valuing that really what we do is to connect people in ways that at least offer them a chance for better choices, opportunities, and resources to go forward. That if we're going to do that, respect and understanding need to be the foundation because we're connecting people and we're using communication to do that. So a favorite question for me, recognizing all those things, is hey, I, I love to sit down with, including on Zoom, look directly at and ask the person who's experiencing a really difficult conflict that's problematic for them. If we could come together to build a solution that might allow you a life of as much meaning and value as possible for yourself and the people who mean the most to you, what would that look like?
Hmm.
And I find that when I ask that, you can ask it in serious injury cases, death cases, you can ask it in business breakup cases, you can ask it in just about any case, and you can vary and reframe the question to suit the situation. But when you do, that expression of sincere interest in who they are and what they need to go forward from here, to end that conflict and to move past it, opens that door for them. Whether they're willing to go there, whether they're willing to tentatively push the door a little and see if it's cracked open, you'll see in their response. But it's a chance to convey sincere curiosity under which must lie sincere respect and understanding
Yeah.
for that person and the others. Because eventually in the process, we're going to ask them to consider that we're doing that in the other room as well. And that in order to get to something everybody can live with, that respectful understanding, curiosity about what they need to go forward is going to have to happen in both rooms. And it's going to have to somehow harmonize, somehow connect.
I like that you start with discussing or introducing the word solution within that question. You say, can you also use the word come together? If we could come together to build a solution that would allow you to build value, what would that look like? Love the framing of it. Chuck, we always discuss the power of framing in mediation. So are you doing that framing intentionally, or is it purely a question happens to do framing for you?
No, that's a great question. And you're exactly right. The framing of the question, the wording of the question, the tone of voice, the timing, the rhythm of your flow, all of those are really, really important factors. As I hear in your voice, you hear in my voice, there is an element that anybody who's listening to this is going to know this guy really believes in what he's saying. He means it. You know, I may or may not agree with it, but he is sincere about what he's saying and where he's coming from. And when that's a question, to invite them to do that, it's a welcome to them. Be who you are, share who you are, say who you are, say it your way, say it in the way that works for you. Because we also know stories connect people. If you really want to find out where people's values, priorities, interests, where their heart is, where their spirit is, offer them the opportunity, welcome them to tell their stories, share their stories. Every time. Lila Love, David Hoffman, they're fantastic at this. Dana Curtis, others, Ken Cloak,
Yeah.
Sukhsimranjit Singh, you probably met him. They're just
I love
amazing at eliciting people's stories.
I love how you connect now the art of asking a good question to the power of listening and opening up. So there's one element is we are opening them up to discuss with us because our jobs Chuck, our jobs as mediators depend upon people willing to talk to us.
Exactly. And I think we need to be constantly conscious that a key element of our job, in order to be a resource to serve others, we have no intrinsic value. We're simply there to be of service, to help them, try and work toward an agreement that is going to ideally liberate them from conflict as much as possible in order to, as we say, go forward with their lives as well as possible. Not only for themselves, but for what Bill Urey calls the third side, the people who are involved and affected, who need to be part of the solution because it will affect them. And when you're doing that, I think understanding that you're asking people to share their value, but you're asking in a way that says, I can see you have value. I know you have value. It's going to be an important element here of any movement towards solution. We invite that because what we're really trying to do, we're trying to move the needle from conflict to resolution, from adversarial partisan perspectives to much more objectively fair, balanced, collective perspectives instead of individual.
Yeah,
Coming
yeah.
from a collective society, you understand that far better than many of us who have grown up in this country. I've had the advantage of living in Vietnam for 5 years, going back there many, many, many times over the last 30 plus years. I love collective societies because people are not individuals, they're parts of units. They're parts of families and extended families and neighborhoods and friend groups and work groups and communities and countries. And they all have meaning and value to them, and they honor that meaning and value because they too are there to be of service and value to those connected groups, those units that they're part of. That is the key to their own personal value. If you
Yeah.
asked someone traditionally in Vietnam when I first went there over 50 years ago, what's the most important thing to your family? One of the things they would tell you is to establish and maintain the extended family's gravesite as perfectly as possible, so that not only for the ancestors there, all of the peace possible will be available, but for all of us who go to visit and connect with them and pray to them and pray for their guidance for us, that there will be as much peace there as possible. And we do that by showing honor and respecting them. People do that in life too. The example of maintaining the family plot is equally applicable to maintaining the family unity, the family relationships. A lot of people indicated that they felt that there were hierarchies. I think in Vietnam, in my experience, the hierarchies were only the surface of the pond of reality. That if you pay attention, if you listen, if you see, if you look deeper, you will see that the hierarchies are the unit connections. So, for example, if there's a dispute in the family, traditionally in the old way, they would go to the oldest male for advice, and he'd either mediate it and help them get to a solution or arbitrate it and tell them what the solution was going to be. But what I also learned is that elder male would go home to his wife or his mother or both, aunties, sisters. He would get their guidance, their input, because we need to understand that traditionally women's role has been far more central in conflict resolution and conflict management than men's. They're the ones they need to tolerate, they need to adjust, they need to flex, they need to compromise, they need to build bridges, they need to bring people together. They need to make the family work as a unit.
So I'm almost hearing that people know the benefit of cooperation. People understand deep down that cooperation will be more beneficial to them in long run, even if not in short run, of course in short run as well, but long run for sure, than competition. Yet they get caught. They get emotionally um, involved in this fight they are in. And our job as mediators, conflict resolvers in any given situation, or healers or listeners in any given situation, is to send them these minute reminders of the bigger picture, of the picture of cooperation versus competition. And that's what I'm trying to find from your first question, if you may. My questions are very similar. I like even start very basic. I ask, tell me about yourself. You know, how can I help you? How can I be of assistance to you today? And that opens up their, our goals are very identical. Yours is a little more directed, and mine is even more open-minded. To ask them whatever is going on in their lives, to have them share that with
And, and I completely agree with you. I've seen many, many people take similar questions, depending on the situation, and turn it into an opportunity to kind of vent, to attack the other side, to elevate themselves, to move the needle back toward that more adversarial, more competitive, more divided direction. They get back into the conflict mode because that's how they come into the room. So I think one of the things that we can focus on trying to do with our questions is to invite them to trust moving that needle toward the more collaborative. Because you know and I know that the only solutions are collaborative. They are not combative. They are not adversarial. They're not partisan. There are elements that have to be taken into account. But Bill Urey, who is an absolutely marvelous and maybe as good a mediator and teacher and trainer and educator of mediation as anyone I've ever seen, except also Ken Clogue and John Sturrock, and the list will grow. But um, for them to trust doing that, they need to feel that that choice can be safe. It's not going to cost them. It's not going to give away something that's important to them. It's not going to allocate to the person in the other room something that they don't think that person deserves. Because they're still measuring what they deserve and what the other person deserves. That's really, really hard for them to let go of.
me. Love
And
that. Love that kind of warning, Chuck. I hear you, and I want to move to next questions. I hear you that you want to be mindful with the open-ended questions, but I want to just share one thought. Culture plays a big role in what and how we ask questions. I shared in my first TEDx talk in Oregon, 2015, that if someone asks me a question about, hey, what are you wearing on your head? Versus, that's a very nice turban. Can you tell me a little more about it? It's the same question asked differently, and it's going to elicit different response. So the idea of how do we change our question asking technique, not just the substance, but the process uh, across cultures makes a difference.
no, and that's a really, really valuable point. It's not just how the question is presented, it's where it comes from and what it asks for, because that's the connective. Where can I come from that's going to invite them to connect, recognizing where they are? And underneath the culture question, and Peter Adler, who is an absolutely fantastic public policy mediator and writer, and I commend his new book that's about to come out in October, Calming the Storm. Amazing, amazing man, and a very, very dear friend. Um, Peter said, culture is the way we see and do things here. I love that way of putting it because your question goes exactly to that point. You're asking people to share how they see and do things that might enable you to be of help, to be of service, to help them get through and past the conflicts that are getting in the way of how they see and do things. And my question, I think, is almost the flip side of that coin, because it asks them, if you could see how to get past it, what would that look like?
Yeah, yeah. And let's go there, because my next question that I like to ask is something about importance. I usually frame it something like, what is most important to you in this meeting today? I don't use the word mediation, but in this meeting, in this setting today, what is most important to you? Do you have any question that kind of goes in that direction, or do you talk about importance? What is important to people?
No, and that's perfect. And David Hoffman, who does an absolutely fabulous Harvard program on negotiations presentation on the role and value of questions in dispute resolution, his favorite question is to ask, what are the questions that I haven't asked that I should be asking?
Hmm.
And that's exactly what you just alluded to. You're inviting the person to step back one step and think not of the answers, the solutions, but what are the questions that they want to be able to respond to? What matters to them? Because we're trying to get at not only their interests and priorities and how to make them part of a solution path, but their values, because those have to be part of the solution path as well.
Love
We,
that. Love that.
they
Yeah.
bring value to the table. We need to bring that out. We need to
Right.
see it,
Right.
understand it, reframe it. And the reframing that you mentioned earlier is critical, because another part of moving the needle is from adversarial partisan to more objectively fair. The only way to move things toward the more objective is to reframe what they're sharing with you in more objective terms. You can do that once you have, through questions, a trust relationship built up, so that when you use the classic active listening thing, so what I hear you saying is da 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 da, that itself is a question. What I prefer to do, instead of trying to characterize what they're saying, hey, is to ask, so if I hear you,
Hmm.
it sounds like, are these some of the things that might be important to you? And just put those in more objective terms. Then you need to come out of this with your family relationships intact. You need to come out of this with dignity. You need to come out of this with the financial resources to be able to fulfill your responsibilities to the people who count on you. Are those important factors here?
Let's let's go to our next question, Chuck. What else do you have in mind that you would rate as your second or third most favorite question?
I think once we've done that with the people in the room we're in, and we need to be in separate rooms with people so they can be open and candid and honest and trusting. At some point, I want to help them see not only that I'm asking the same questions in the other room, but I'm asking them to think about, what would you most like us, including the people in the other room, to understand about what is most important to you
Hmm.
in getting through this? What do they
Hmm.
need to understand about you? And what do you think you might need to understand about them? What can I find out from them that's going to help you better understand what they might be able to live with?
I like that. Let me pause here for a second. So what is it that they, the people in the other room, may need to understand about you and your situation that will perhaps help us today, if I may add that, or that will take us to the next um,
And
opportunity or opportunity.
and what might you need to understand better about them in order to see if there may be a way to bridge the gap?
Absolutely. What do you need to understand about them to bridge the gap? Um, which is very close to my question, which is um, I switch you say them, I switched that to I, and my question was, what do I need to know about you and your case today, or your matter today, that will help you resolve this today? So I almost like a two different psychologies. One is discussing what do other people want to understand, which I like even more because the conflict is between them. And the only downside I see in that, Chuck, is, oh, they will never understand me. Forget about it. I don't know what you're asking that question. Have you seen them? Did you see what they did this morning when they came in? And you think they're going to understand what I'm going to say? And that that reactive devaluation kicks in as soon as I use the word they or them or the other room.
Yep.
Versus when I'm there present as a mediator, neutral person, I want to use myself, not just as a scapegoat or as a leader, as a servant, whatever you want to call, but also as a median that you can rely upon. So that's the only thing I changed. I think both can exist, depend upon parties, right?
No, and you're exactly right. And in fact, when I do it, I tend to use the word we because I co-mediate with an absolutely wonderful, wonderful co-mediator whose life experience and work experience bring the 98% of what I'm missing to the table to help people connect with each other. And it's wonderful to see and experience.
Awesome. One question that I like to talk about, Chuck, in mind. So I'm very big on motivations. What motivates people? And I used to be shy about asking it directly, but now started asking it, what is motivating you to today's meeting? Why did you come here today? What was your thought process as you decided to embark on this joint meeting in terms of understanding the other and being open to a possibility? Let me pause here but ask you. I'm sure, or at least I'm positive, that you have some kind of thinking around that word, if you use it, or question around that tone.
No, exactly. That's a perfect question. And one of the variants of that that I really like to use at an appropriate stage in the mediation is on a scale of 1 to 100, how important is it to you to end this today, to be able to put this to rest and move on with your life? I'm not going to ask it until I'm pretty sure that they're starting to see that in addition to the terms of a possible agreement, there is a value and benefit to ending the conflicts that goes beyond those terms and may be greater than the value of all of those terms, all that money, all that property, whatever goes into the settlement. And one of the great moments that Diana, my co-mediator, and I had at the last stage of a previous mediation, couple that had been together for 30 years, had 4 children, they had finally split up, very, very high emotion. They had sold the family home and they were negotiating and mediating to divide the proceeds. And we got to ask each of them once we were pretty comfortable that we're going to get there and we know where it was going to end up. How important is it to you? And the woman said 100 plus. And the man said 90 plus. And I kind of teased him and said, well, you don't need to hold back. If you're saying 90 plus, it got to be closer to 100. He said, yeah, probably. And it was interesting because when we responded to that by saying, you have achieved an A plus score, you have earned the settlement, this case is settled. The look on the woman's face and her body language was as if a weight of hundreds of kilos had been lifted off of her. It was just, you could see it, you could feel it. It suffused the whole room. And with the man, because he was winding up with the responsibility for most of the children, he put his face down in his hands and tears came because it was so moving a relief to him.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for
Questions
sharing
make
those.
that possible.
Yeah, the power of questions. Yeah, the as we come towards the last 5 to 10 minutes of our talk today. I, I feel like we need to do a part two of this, but in this part one, what are the questions that we haven't discussed yet that you would like to share with our audience?
I think one of the things is exactly what you brought up early on in this conversation, and that is, I think it's important early on to ask them, what brought you and the other people together in the relationship that you have had up to the time of this conflict? And what happened to change that? What got you all where you are now? And what can we learn from that that can help us maybe find a way to resolve things? So I want to put the question into a learning context.
Mhm.
How do they see the relationship? How do they see the best of its history? How do they see? And I really like to ask people in some situations, where do you think it started to go south?
Mhm.
And that's with no impunity to the people south of the Mason-Dixon line, where I was born but did not grow up. But it's a phrase we use.
I'm almost listening to you, and I feel like what I'm getting at is different people respond to different questions, and you are perhaps giving them another chance to explore a blockage, a barrier that they may be facing that they may not be even aware of. So giving them these options of what brought you here today, what is important about this relationship for you today, what's important about the future for you today. Asking almost the same question differently can bring different answers.
And I think that's a really, really valuable insight, Sukhsimran, because we're trying to build a relationship with each of those people that is founded on trust, respect, and understanding in order to be of service, in order to help them be of service to themselves with seeing and making better choices. And in doing that, I think it's critical that we offer them the opportunity to recognize that the choices that are available to them are only limited by what they might be willing to agree to, not what a court could do or an arbitrator could do or a lawyer could tell them is possible. That the more choices we make available, the more likely we are to be able to find out which ones move in the direction that they might be able to live with. And I've been surprised many times. I've thrown a couple of choices out that seem to make kind of logical, rational sense and have people come back and say, no, I'd rather do this. And then go in that direction and it works because they know what's going to work for them better than any of us.
Mm, mm,
And it is not our place to impose judgment. We have to be a friend to them, and a friend does not judge. A friend listens, a friend values, a friend offers support and resources. Because if we can build that relationship with us, we can build that trust relationship with the process.
mm.
Because we are the embodiment of the process, that conflict management, conflict resolution process. And there is no disconnect.
I like that idea of people are limited by their own thinking, right? And your question about choices is almost like opening people's mind up in a very diplomatic way to make them think that they do have more choices than they think they have. Only if I usually, when I train executives and lawyers and judges, I always say our biggest negotiation in a mediation is with people's thought process, right? They come to you with a thought, and this is it. I need this today. This is it, what I want from the other party. But our biggest negotiation is making them think differently, making them approach the same problem differently. So that's what your question reminds me is the choices are already there. The point is, what have they convinced themselves, and how can we move them not away from that conviction, but having them become aware that there are more than one kind of possibility here.
And that's exactly right, because what you're saying recognizes that we can then ask them when they tell us, so is this something that's very important to you? And they'll affirm that. And we can explore, why is that? What is it about that that makes that particularly important to you in this situation and going forward? And we can refocus on going forward, not on exacting punishment or vengeance for what happened in the past or didn't happen. But the other thing that we can do with that on the choice element is we can get into what you and I love, the what if questions. They'll say, I need this, I want that. And you think about that, and you think about what's the same statement in the other room. And you say, well, what if we could? And I
Mhm.
like that first person plural we, because it reminds us, if there's going to be an agreement, it's going to have to be a collective agreement, not an individually imposed agreement.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that helps because you will get people coming into mediation who believe they have far more power, leverage, experience, and
Yeah.
they're willing to abuse it because they believe that works for them.
Yeah.
Insurance companies have been notorious for that, although adjusters are people too. And if you treat them and deal with them as people, you can often elicit that um, in ways that they would never have expected at the beginning of the mediation. One of my favorite moments in a mediation was an injury case. So we were talking about money and compensation, and the senior insurance adjuster out of the room full of insurance adjusters and attorneys said, Chuck, I see where you're going. We're not going to get there. We've agreed to split it equally. We've agreed what the number is, and that's our number, and we're just not going to get where you're going. And I looked at him and said, Don, I'm 78 years old. I'm hearing impaired. There are certain words and phrases that do not enter my auditory canal. Line in the sand, bottom line, stuff like that. You can say it till your face turns blue, and it ain't going in there. And he
I
kind of
love that.
smiled. I wasn't insulting him. I wasn't arguing with him. I was
Yeah.
joking with him about my own deficiencies, right? And he said, so what you're saying is we should keep talking. I said, hey, my job is to find out everybody's best number. We're not there yet. But I would rephrase it a little bit. I think our job is to keep listening.
Yes. Mm.
And at the
Mm.
end of the day, he was the first guy to put his money out there for exactly the number he said we would never get to.
Mm. So in many words, Chuck, I'm learning our questions are pathways to an opening where we as mediators need to pay attention to be able to take people further. It's not the job is done with asking good question. The job just started. And today we just almost like we focused on part one of being a good mediator, which is the art of asking questions, the willingness to ask questions, the the fear of going into a territory which is unknown. Because what questions brings to us, it in fact brings to us vacuum from our side and power to the other side. Because when you ask a question, the other party speaks. So we don't know what they're going to say. So this idea of having comfortableness with their story, with their idea, and being as you said, being able to listen to it, then comes that's the second and third phase. Um, and maybe I'll give you a last comment to make or two, and then I look forward to concluding our excellent discussion today. Thank you, Chuck. Yes.
No, and that's a perfect way to say it, Sukhsimran, because it's not whether we agree with their stories or not. We're not there to judge their stories or their lives or their values, but it's what we can learn from it that enable us to help them. And so I like your thoughts on a quote from the late, great Leonard Cohen, one of my very, very favorite composers and musical artists. He said, everything has a crack in it. That's how the light gets in. Are we, through questions, trying to help people find the cracks where the light can get in?
Mm, mm. I think on that good note, are we helping people to find the crack where the light goes in? On that profound note, I would like to thank you, Chuck, um, Mr. Chuck Crumpton. This has been a blessing to be with you this morning. I really enjoy your company, and again, it proves me today that why we need to do this more often. And I appreciate your time. I think every audience member will appreciate your wisdom that you shared, the stories you shared, the heart you shared, and we look forward to future conversations. Thank you so much.
Namaste. My soul bows to
Namaste.
yours.
Thank you. Thank you.